In the world of Sasquatch, the ultimate piece of trace evidence one can find in the field is footprints. Track casts have been made of many different shapes and sizes throughout the decades, and I have to say, when you see some of these track casts up close, you can't help but be totally blown away. In the online community, you can see all kinds of photos posted of supposed Sasquatch tracks, and only a few actually pass in-depth scientific analysis and are classified as potentially real. Yes, I said scientific. There is indeed a minuscule number of scientists who are in fact looking into the Bigfoot subject. One of the most notable in the last few decades is Dr. Jeff Meldrum of Idaho State University. He's the leading guy when it comes to these tracks. But as of late, one of the more interesting forms of Sasquatch trace evidence is actually fingerprints. In the past, actual hand impressions that have been left in the ground have been cast and cataloged, but I'm talking about actual fingerprints. These fingerprints seem to, more often than not, show up on the surfaces of people's cars or trucks. And even weirder, these fingerprints are very, very oily. When the prints are left on the body or window of a car and the wind blows dust across them, they usually show up quite brilliantly. Imagine being out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of kilometers away from people. You're on a multi-day camping trip, and as you're sitting around the campfire on the first night, you're startled by the sound of a large tree crashing down maybe just 25 yards or so from your camp. You think, well, I'm in the forest, there's trees all around, there's nothing unusual about a tree falling down in the forest. But you're in Sasquatch country, and that is the actual reason why you came here. You had heard multiple reports of Sasquatch sightings from this area from credible sources, and you thought to yourself, hey, maybe I'll try my luck at finding one of these things. And here you are. But you can't say for sure what caused that tree to come down, so you just brush it off as a natural occurrence. Until you wake up, that is, and you notice that on your car window are the most out of place and unusual fingerprints that look as if whatever left them was almost trying to peek inside of your vehicle to see if you were inside. This is exactly what happened to me and my friends back in the summer of 2015, while out filming my first documentary, Wild Man: My Search for Sasquatch. Since then, so many people have come forward with either a similar experience or photo and video documentation of fingerprints that are nearly identical. I've always been bewildered by this experience, and recently I had an excellent discussion with my friend Ben Walgate from the 401 Files YouTube channel on the subject of these Sasquatch fingerprints. Let's get into that. Yeah, so the first time I went out to the Nordegg area to actually film Bigfoot content for my first film, Wild Man, we had this experience where after the first night, we showed up, we heard a loud crack in the bushes and what sounded like a tree falling over very close to our camp area. And when you think of the vastness of the forest, it's the odds of something cracking and like a tree cracking and falling down right exactly where you are in the vastness of the forest is very low. It happens, but it was weird that we were in the exact area where these things were supposed to be, where a lot of people have seen them, and we're going out to look for them, and that happened at around midnight. It scared the crap out of us, and we kind of trekked off into the night to see what it was. We couldn't find anything though. But the next morning when we woke up, we all had our tent set up, and I think we had two vehicles. We had my vehicle and one of my buddy's vehicles. It was a white Envoy, GMC Envoy or something. Yeah. And when we woke up, we're getting our gear together, and he went to close his car door, and there was fingerprints on the car window that were very oily, and the wind had blown dust over them, so it made them show up they look like if you dusted fingerprints on at a crime scene.
CSI stuff, yeah.
Exactly. So the fingerprints, the weird thing about them was that, well, we didn't notice them before. We had driven hundreds of kilometers down gravel roads, and they didn't stick out to us at all the day before and in the evening up until the morning. So I'm not saying they weren't there before, but it really seemed like they showed up after that first night, and they were very, very oily. You could see it. And the interesting thing is that there's dermal ridges, and there's nothing else out there in nature other than people or a primate of some kind that would have dermal ridges and leave actual fingerprints. So I was able to shoot some pretty high resolution photos of them.
Yeah.
And they were in weird positions, like two hands together pressed in two different spots on the car window. And so the cool thing is, though, is that in recent years, many people have come forward with photos of the exact same thing while out in these wilderness areas looking for Bigfoot. They have these fingerprints show up usually on their vehicles. I've seen them on like the hoods of vehicles, on the doors, and like on the windows. Many people have experienced this. And back when it happened to us, we didn't even know that that was a thing, like that Sasquatch left behind. You're always thinking of like footprints. The footprints are like the main form of evidence that people gather when out looking for Bigfoot,
Yeah,
right? They're like
iconic.
they're like the ultimate piece of trace evidence, Bigfoot,
Yeah.
right? There's also been handprints that have been casted like in mud where they will like press their knuckles down if they're like crouched down or crawling around. People have casted actual handprints. But these fingerprints are interesting because, theoretically, if you can collect a sample of it, you might be able to get a DNA test done.
Yeah.
At that time when we were filming this thing, though, this is the first time out experiencing this stuff. We had no idea to even try to collect a sample of it. We weren't even sure if it was Bigfoot. But now, looking back at it and then seeing all the other examples that people have come forward with, it's like, wow, could have actually been Bigfoot. And they weren't very big hands either. They seemed small, which kind of matches up to the size of the footprints that we had found later that day in the moss, which is, featured in the film. So it was weird.
Are you thinking more juvenile Bigfoot?
Yeah, that's the feeling we got. Not only because like of the size of the tracks and the fingerprints, but also because it just seemed like playful behavior.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say like you believe this was juvenile and it was more playful, because that is something that a juvenile or a youngster that's maybe not that experienced with human activity would do. And to give like a really silly analogy of what I'm talking about here is that sometimes out here in the countryside where I live, we get rats and I have to put rat traps out. I never ever capture an adult rat. It's always the youngsters, the inquisitive ones. In fact, I've even seen the larger rats, the ones that I've been trying to catch, come up to the trap, smell it, and just walk straight past. They know, they're smart. And so when you say that it was likely a juvenile, that makes more sense than, say, a fully grown adult Bigfoot. So yeah, that kind of ties in with the credibility of that as well.
Yeah, like it's weird to think about, because if it was like a juvenile Sasquatch, that means it would have been there the first night. It would have been hanging around somewhere, and it would have, pushed over that tree. It would have left footprints in the moss. And then it would have showed up at some point in the night somehow to leave fingerprints on the car without us knowing, without leaving footprints on the gravel road. Because I feel like if something was standing by the car, there would have been footprints there. That is a weird thing that I cannot explain. Also, it's weird to think like if that juvenile was there, do they get like, are they allowed to go explore wherever they want to and approach people? That I don't understand, because it seems like a dangerous thing to do. But maybe it wasn't alone. Maybe like mom or dad was like in the general area. It's weird to think about, but it's like at the end of the day, I can't say 100% too that it was Sasquatch, right? But the tree falling, the fingerprints showing up, and then finding very strange footprints in the moss within like 24 hours kind of makes you believe that it was a Sasquatch.
Yeah, and you just mentioned there that like you can't imagine the parents would allow the juvenile Sasquatch to wander off and do its own thing. But we don't really know how long juveniles stay with the adult Sasquatch for. They could be kicked out of the nest if that's what they live in, say after 6 months, 7 months, left to do their own thing. But even in the animal kingdom, like adult animals will allow their youngsters, their juveniles, to wander off and do their own thing. So the next question I would ask, though, was there any food in the car?
Probably. There must have been, because we were car camping. Like there's probably all kinds of food in the car. Nothing showed up on my vehicle though. But yeah, I should clarify, like because I said there was no tracks on the road. We didn't find tracks on the road where the cars were, but we did find tracks in the moss, in the bush, in the direction of where we think the tree fell. So just to clarify, we did find tracks, but not at the cars.
Imagine if that had been like 3 or 4 years later when that happened. You'd have got all the DNA, you'd have took a swab, it would have been absolutely amazing. But it's always the case, like when you least expect something to happen, it happens. Or when you've just started out and you don't know too much about the subject, that's when you have your best experiences. It's just typical, isn't it? But
it is typical.
Yeah, I saw it on the video, and to me, it looks compelling. Like there's no denying that they are definitely fingerprints on the car window.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if I went back now and had the same experience, like everything would have turned up. Like we would have way more data and probably a sample of something. It's the one thing you hope for when you go out, is to be able to like collect something and like bring something back.
Yeah, if you think about that, there's not too many things in the woods or in nature where you could leave a fingerprint. I mean, glass is a brilliant like material to leave fingerprints on, as well as plastic. But wood, moss, those kind of things that are natural, where you would expect to see a Bigfoot, you're not really going to find prints on any of that stuff. So that was really lucky that you guys captured that. I love that.
Yeah. What I was thinking, what a person could do is they could take like strips of clear double-sided tape and maybe like hang them off like branches. Another investigator that I know, he said that, well, he believes, just based on what he's experienced and what other people have experienced, that Sasquatch are attracted to the color blue for some reason. I don't know why, but there was a few cases where like things that were the color blue were like tampered with. And so if you took like maybe a piece of clear double-sided tape, and then on one side of it you took like blue flagging tape and like stuck it along the strip, and then maybe put another piece of clear tape over top, so there's like blue flagging tape in between, sandwiched in between two clear pieces of double-sided tape, and then just hung that. Like, it's an interesting thing. They'd be like, what is this? And then they might touch it.
Yeah, you should definitely try that.
Yeah, I would. I should. Like, there's no reason not to. It's not like it's like it's cheap to go buy some tape. Like, it's something that I think people should do, because I do think there's something behind this, and a lot of other researchers do as well. And it's been happening all over like the continent, pretty much, here in Alberta and the neighboring provinces and down into the United States. People have been experiencing it, and also like out east in Ontario, I've seen photos of people, having these experiences and like seeing this stuff show up on their car. It's like, and it always happens in areas where they're having other experiences as well. Like they're hearing these things, or they're finding other pieces of evidence as well. I don't think it's a coincidence, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I can't remember just in fully back to that piece of footage. No, I have seen, obviously, but I can't remember in detail the size of the prints themselves. Like, if you look at human fingerprints, the rings are quite close together. Was this larger than a human fingerprint, or would you say it was about the same?
They looked, like about the same. They were not big.
Yeah.
To anyone watching, like, you can go look at the film.
Yeah.
And, you can see it for yourself. It was just strange. And like, this area is so far into the wilderness, like down gravel roads. I have a hard time believing that when we were in the city or in like civilization, somebody came up to the car and was like messing around with the window, and then we drove like hundreds of kilometers in the mountains and they just remained there like that. It's
and nobody noticed it as well.
And nobody noticed it. Yeah. It's just another thing to look out for when you're in the wilderness, especially if you're car camping, or if you park your car at like a trailhead. Maybe when you get back from your hike, if you're out hiking, you park your car, you go hiking. When you come back, just do a walk around and see if there's anything on your car.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of the last place a person would even think to look. Like, they want to go find Bigfoot and they're going to go out into the trees and they're going to be looking for tracks and stuff. when maybe when you were gone, something showed up and like left fingerprints on your car. But the characteristic that seems to be common is that they're really oily.
That is a freaky experience as well, though, because like you mentioned earlier, if it was a juvenile, you could have been in close proximity to a full-blown adult Bigfoot, really close by. That's a scary thought. Mm-hmm. Was you guys being quiet, like stealthy, or was you being quite loud and just pushing your way through?
No, it was four guys out there, like we were just having a good time, like trying to make a documentary. Like we weren't being stealthy at all. And I don't think you have to. I don't think like they're gonna know you're there anyways. You pull up in vehicles, like there's no point being stealthy. This was like the area where we parked the cars was our little base camp. We had a fire pit there, and that was just where we were gonna be hanging out and, you know, sleeping and whatnot. And from there we would trek out in different directions throughout the day and just explore. I didn't really like the idea to pick that spot for camping wasn't really decided until we got there. It was kind of random because the road was actually washed out and it was blocked off. We couldn't travel any further. So that's where we said, okay, well, there's a fire pit here. We might as well just camp here. And so it was random. And then we had all this weird stuff happen. But like afterwards, doing more research on the area, we found out that that is the hotspot. Like almost exactly, people have seen Sasquatch in that exact area, like big time. And it's not very far away at all as the crow flies from those tree structures, the site where all those tree structures are. It's actually quite close.
So there's a lot of activity in that area.
There's a lot of activity. Probably some of the best. I would say that it's probably one of the biggest hotspots in like Canada.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big statement. Yeah, that's good. So it's likely then that it probably was a juvenile, like an inquisitive little juvenile just looking at the car. Maybe it smelled food in there or something. And as it's peered in, it's put its hand on the window to look through and maybe left the oily fingerprints.
Yeah. And there were other little weird things that had happened as well. Like we had went out to do some exploring during the day, and the one guy that was with me, he had left, I don't know why he did it, just an experiment maybe. He put a banana chip on a rock that was part of like the fire pit.
Yeah.
He left it there. And then when we came back, there was a dried mushroom in place of where the banana chip was. The banana chip was gone and there was a dried mushroom cap sitting on the rock.
You see, now that's weird.
Supposedly some critters will do that. But it's also interesting because when I was out on Vancouver Island last summer, I was talking to a boat captain about Bigfoot. He was telling me stories. And he said that the local Indigenous people in that area believe that the Sasquatch can connect to the mycelial network, which is the fungal, network underground. It's basically like the internet for plants. And they can communicate with each other.
I think it's like the biggest living organism as well. Like the mycelial network is huge.
Yeah, so it's interesting though that a mushroom of all things was left there, a fungus. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know.
And I bet that's not a common occurrence. So the critters that do actually leave things in place, I bet you that's not. I bet that's a rarity. I don't think that they do that often. Like squirrels and other little animals, I don't think they'll do that all the time. Yeah. So it's very coincidental that just at the moment that you guys are there, one of these little critters decides to leave you a gift in return for what it's taken. That seems very unlikely.
Yeah, and when you think that all this other weird stuff is happening too,
yeah,
it's just like another thing added to it. Like so many different things had happened that it's kind of hard not to think that it was, Bigfoot.
Was that the trip where you took your other friend who's quite skeptical as well?
No, that was a different. He wasn't there on that trip.
I was going to ask. I was going to say, what was the mood with everyone else that he was there with? Did they think that it was weird as well, or was they trying to make sense?
They thought it was weird. It's interesting because the two of the guys that were there with me were like pretty skeptical. They were just like, oh, I don't know, Justin. Like, we'll do this and entertain the idea, Yeah. But the other guy that was there, the fourth guy, he was actually brothers with one of the skeptical guys. He had found tracks in northern Saskatchewan here in Canada that looked like Bigfoot tracks. So he was kind of a believer. But by the end of the trip, after all this stuff happened, they were like pretty convinced, I think, that something was actually going on. So it was interesting to like observe that in them showing up kind of skeptical, and then by the end of it they were like so open to it. They're like, wow, like what is this stuff? This weird stuff is going on, you know. It's crazy. And it was lucky too, because I thought that going out on that trip nothing was going to happen and it was going to be boring and nothing interesting was going to go on. But
that's just how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, I know. It just,
when you least expect it, something happens.
Yeah,
I'd be freaked out if that happened here, because where I parked my car on the North Yorkshire Moors, I mean, it's nowhere near as remote as where you guys are. But even there, like, you're lucky if you see, you know, I mean, no one really ever parks next to my car ever. You might see a few cars come down in like a large window of time, but no one really parks near my car, and I'd be quite freaked out if I did see a car parked there. Let alone come back to the car and there's fingerprints on the window. That'd be really creepy. So, and that's here. So where you guys are, in the vast remote areas that you go to, the chances of that being another person, in my opinion, is just it's not realistic.
Yeah, and like if it was a person, it would have had to have been when we were back in civilization prior, because when we showed up that first night, we didn't go hiking really anywhere. Like we stayed around camp that whole night, and then when we woke up we were still at the camp. So like we would have known if people had showed up because we were camping right by the cars.
Yeah,
but then it's weird, because then you think like, how could something approach the car silently without us knowing? We're sleeping in tents, like we can hear stuff, and then not leave any footprints. And then you're like, okay, well, now we got to get into the supernatural side of the subject, try and figure out what is going on.
It's a really weird question, but you should have smelled, like you should have maybe smudged some off and had a smell, see if it had any kind of odor to it. That would have been interesting.
I've thought about that, because you know they do have cases of the odor that people report. You know, they like a really putrid, disgusting odor that people will smell when one of these things are around.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, with you saying it being really oily, like normally substances like that do have an odor of some kind. It would have been interesting to see what. But
that's the thing, like we didn't know what we were dealing with or what was going on. We didn't even know how to investigate properly. Because of course, like the whole time you're there, like you're trying to coordinate everything, and you're also like trying to get shots and like make a film. So there's so many different things to think about that you like forget to do things, or like you don't even think like to do certain things, you know how it is when you're out filming. Like your mind has to focus on so many different things.
So many things. You get sidetracked so easily when you're out in the woods or out in the wilderness with other things, let alone what you're there for and the strange phenomena that's taking